Dad always used to say the only causes worth fighting for were the lost causes.
The Senator yield. No, sir, I will not yield.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
You're listening to a Pyrolitical Pyrocast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pyrocast presented by Pyrolitical Radio Show. I'm Thomas.
And I'm Randall.
We got some great topics as usual tonight. Randall,
Yes,
why don't you share what we're talking about?
Well, we're maybe talked a little bit of self-reliance, talk about safe spaces and, climate change. All good topics.
Well, you're going to need a safe space. This content will blow your mind. You'll want to run away. But before we do that, I want to thank you again for listening. If you would please go over to Pyrolitical Live on YouTube and subscribe, that would be wonderful. Hit the little bell so you'll get every notification because you don't want to miss any of this.
Every week. Boom.
Absolutely. Well, Randall, you threw out a couple good meaty topics here. Where do you think we ought to begin?
Well, it's a good question. I really like the topic of self-reliance, and what it is, and if there's a need for it in today's world. I think that the world is more and more trying to drive people away from being self-reliant, trying to coddle them, and the nanny state wants to take care of people from cradle to grave. And there seems to be less and less a place in the civilized world for individuals who are self-reliant, who understand what's going on. You know what I'm talking about?
Well, we definitely don't want to be accused of being civilized here, but we do know...
You do have a beard.
Well, and that's true. With every inch it grows, I'm more self-reliant and I'm better at chopping wood. Oh, man. I was trying to do the acronym wood chop per second. Anyway, I think I've been thinking about free speech for a long time, and I think free speech simply reflects the philosophy you have. And if you speak freely, you reveal yourself. And I'm wondering, we fight for the people here, but I'm wondering, is there a portion of the people that have been so dependent on government for so long that they don't comprehend self-reliance? Does that make sense? Like if you were in intergenerational poverty, dependent on government benefits and that, is it almost impossible for you to comprehend what self-reliance means?
I think to have that discussion, first we have to kind of get down to the root of what self-reliance is. I mean, what does it mean for an individual to be self-reliant? Does that mean that you have all your own food supply, you have all your own monetary supply, you're not reliant on any outside source for a job or whatever? Is that what that is, or is that the rugged individualist and self-reliance? Being self-reliant is something different. I mean, because if we don't understand what it means to be self-reliant, sometimes we can take that idea and really, put a different connotation to it than what it actually is. What does it mean to be self-reliant? What do you think it means, Thomas?
Well, I think it means a lot of things, and I think it's overwhelming to me as a man. There's so many things like financially and things I could teach my son, and gardening and weapons. Like I went shooting a couple weeks ago, but I feel like there's so many areas of self-reliance you could focus on, but it's super hard to do because of our economy nowadays. Both parents tend to work, and it doesn't leave a lot of time on a daily basis to teach your kids certain things. I know in previous generations, I was reading an article about, safe spaces and how in olden days, so to speak, kids were given as many jobs as they could handle. I mean, it pushed them right to their limits. Like on the farm, kids went out, they milked cows, they moved the sprinkler pipes, they did whatever was needed to do, feed the animals, and they were expected to tow their weight. Nowadays, it's like our kids are on devices, they have it pretty easy. So I think that's where I struggle, is that so much of my effort's focused on making a living. It's really hard to take the time to take the kid out and show him how to gut a deer or skin a deer.
Well, and that brings up a wholly different issue. I think, well, maybe it's related, but it's almost like the up and coming generation, and even some of our generation, almost live like an emotional pane of glass. Like if you stress it almost at all, it could just shatter. And these kids, they, you take away devices for a day, and it's like their world has exploded, right? They don't have a connection. They don't have internet for a day, and all of a sudden the face Twitters are not booking them anymore. They don't know what's going on, and they can't deal with being disconnected. And it's like, and I think, I don't know. I'm no scientist, but I think, and I'm no psychologist, but I believe that part of that is in relation to, how they were brought up. If you were brought up to work really hard and deal with tough situations, then when you have tough situations when you're older, typically you're able to deal with them. But when you're coddled, we had this generation, well, especially after World War II, and then the generation after that, where they're like, oh, we don't want to do things like our parents did. We want to give our kids these great opportunities. And part of that was a total undermining of what their national identity was, what they were as an individual, who they could become, and it was all based on what they had, right? And then if they didn't match up to what mom and dad had, or they sought to try and get it right away, and then if they lost that, say in 2008, with the last major bubble bursting, what happened to their self-image? They just like those individuals at the start of the Great Depression that were jumping out of buildings because money was no longer valued what it was before. They had debts, and anyway. But I guess that was down another rabbit hole. But I let's bring it back real quick. I think the root of self-reliance is accountability. It doesn't mean that you have to know how to gut a deer, but you're accountable for that understanding and that knowledge, right? It doesn't mean that you have to be completely self-employed. It doesn't mean that you have 128 years worth of food storage so you could survive independently of everyone else. But I think the root of it is just being accountable for those decisions. So when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, maybe you don't have, maybe the crap hits the fan and you don't have enough food. You're accountable for the fact that you made a decision that got you to that point, and you don't whine and gripe about how somebody else put you in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I found this really good quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who lived in the 1800s. He's considered the founding father of the American Transcendental Movement. But he wrote an article called, and it's an essay called Self-Reliance. And there's a quote from it that I find really interesting. It says, discontent is the want of self-reliance. It is infirmity of will. So he's saying that the discontent you feel is based on the lack of self-reliance. You're wanting to be self-reliant. And so maybe a lot of the unrest in society is really people carrying out this huge amount of discontent they have. Think about it. If the president makes you so angry that you take a picture of holding a severed head like Kathy Griffin did, if you're so discontented that you riot or you won't allow free speech on a campus or whatever, you clearly do not have self-reliance because the external world has put you into a place that you can't find peace. In fact, the thing about Emerson I didn't realize is that his wife died when she was 20 years old. So he quit the ministry and he traveled around the world. He went to the Mediterranean, he looked at the ancient treasures, and he said that the works of Plato and of the scriptures couldn't heal him, it couldn't bring him peace. So he decided to look inward, and that's when these philosophies came forth about self-reliance. And there was another one that he wrote. I can't remember what the name of it was. Anyway, Divinity School address. So anyway, he had to find peace through self-reliance by looking inside. And no matter what he saw, the works of the world and art and all these things, he couldn't find peace till he became more reliant on himself. And so I think, Randall, a lot of people that have discontent and cause havoc in society are just exhibiting the want of self-reliance.
Right. Totally,
they're not fulfilled.
Well, and so I was just thinking, down those lines, the inception of many of these, say, governmental programs that are there to act as a safety net for individuals, which really, they can empower an individual if an individual lets them, but in most cases, they debase the individual and they erode the individual's self-reliance. And I think the individuals, as well-meaning as they were when they tried to create these programs, were looking at themselves, their own internal compass and saying, you know what, I'm not self-reliant enough to be able to handle this, and I wouldn't help other people, but I know if I force the government to do it, they'll take care of it for me. And so we keep adding more and more programs on that, and we further erode the self-reliant nature of individuals. We were a self-reliant nation, the turn of the 20th century. You
didn't have a choice.
Yeah, you just
had
did.
To be.
And I think one of the greatest. Some people look at it and say, well, it was kind of sad the way it was. But I look at like the Okies, those that came out of the Dust Bowl, or those that stayed in the Dust Bowl. There was nothing, right? There was just dust, sand blowing every day. It was impacting their health. But those individuals, they had fought, most of them immigrants, came from overseas. This is maybe the first time in their lives or in recorded history that individuals from their areas that they'd come from had been able to own land. And now they had land, and the last thing they wanted to do was walk away from it. And most of them, they didn't ask for government handouts. They didn't go seeking for reparations or anything. They were trying to wait it out. Next year will be better. Next year will be better, right? And then there were those that said, well, you know what? We're not going to make it here anymore. We've had too many bad years here in the Dust Bowl, and they moved to California, and they were just shunned, because they didn't want to go beg. They were looking for work. They were looking to try and better themselves. But ultimately, it came down to, like I was saying, that accountability for their actions. This is my responsibility. I'm responsible. I'm self-reliant, so I'm accountable for this decision. Even if it meant staying and suffering in the Dust Bowl, or if it meant going to California, they took accountability for that decision and didn't try and place the blame on anyone else. They just went with it because that's what life had dealt them, and so they were going to deal with it. And maybe not all of them. I'm sure there were individuals, but it seemed like that was the vast majority of examples of perseverance at that time. They were in that camp. And it's just whenever I hear a story like that, as heart-wrenching as it may be, I always love to hear the story of individuals who stood up and did what it took. Even if they were in abject poverty, they didn't say, oh, this is someone else's fault and I'm just going to, cry about it for a year. They said, well, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to stay here and continue, or are we going to go somewhere else and make life better? Let's make a decision. Let's make it happen. Yeah,
well, it reminds me of a little bit more of what Thoreau said in this. He said, Emerson. He said, nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. And I thought, it is the true measure of self-reliance when you seek out principles and you apply them in your life. Because once you do that, you own that knowledge. There's nothing that can be undone once you learn that principle. But he says there's a result of that. For nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure. So you can tell one way that you're being self-reliant is that the world will show you that it's displeased with it. with you. And so that's why I was saying with free speech and on college campuses, when truly free thinkers come, a lot of people are offended or feel threatened by free speech and free thought. And so another one that he says is, in every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. So anyway, as I think about this, the people that are self-reliant in your life because they seem to survive no matter what happens to them, and they seem to flourish. I'm thinking of a relative in particular who went bankrupt when he was 60, had a huge farm. I don't even remember how many acres, but they were making just under $1 million a year. They got wiped out and lost everything, and he ended up being a janitor. Well, in the 20 years that followed, he ended up rebuying a new home and buying his vehicles and building a decent retirement for himself. And I just thought, if I failed at 60, I'd almost want to just give up because it would feel like life was over, but this person didn't. And they turned out to be okay financially and survived. So the other thing too, Randall, I had an odd thought that's connected to this. We are less self-reliant than they used to be because we have less children. Back in those days, you had to have a lot of children because there was a high mortality, but also because you had to live together and you had to survive together. And now with government retirement and all these benefits, you just don't have to stick together as a family anymore. And so it's interesting, but I think the birth rate shows that we have a divisive culture now where we just spread out and we don't stick together. I don't know. Maybe that's a stretch, or maybe I didn't connect that very well.
No, I think that tends to be the trend. We give in to more and more of these government programs, however good they may be. I mean, I see that one of the major contributors to that was probably the interstate highway system and World War II. You had all these people who they would have been stuck in their town. Transportation was hard, and they grew up on the farm. That's where they were going to stay. And all of a sudden, they had this major look at the international scene. There was the GI Bill to try and get people, these GIs, once they came back from World War II, to go to school. We needed lots of engineers and chemists and you name it, and they needed this advanced training. So they went out, they saw the world, they got away from their small town, and no longer were they were, maybe some of them too good. Maybe some of them just felt like they shouldn't waste the knowledge that they'd received. And they probably also had some parents who were like, this is a better life for you. Don't come back to the farm. So there was probably all these different things going on. But the crux of it is that rural America, the heart and soul of America, was really torn to shreds. There's still remnants of it around, but the vast majority of it was really decimated during the Greatest Generation's growth and maturity. They go ahead.
I figured it out.
Okay.
And I was laughing because I'm like, okay, here we're talking about self-reliance, and we bring up World War II, the highway interstate system, and the birth rate. Only on this show can you get so many angles. That might not make sense at first, but I figured out why the birth rate makes so much sense in creating a non-self-reliant generation. Because those big families of the past, the parents didn't have time to coddle each child. Like if you have one or two children now, you can kind of do everything for them. I've noticed that. Growing up with 5 kids in a family, you kind of just had to stake your own claim and be tough for yourself and stand out in whatever way made sense. But now with 1 or 2 kids, it's like mom can do everything or dad can, and we just kind of baby them. You don't have to take on a role like you used to.
Right.
And my neighbors growing up had 16 kids. Do you think they were coddled?
No.
Like mom had time to coddle 16 kids.
Not at all. Not at all.
Oldest was my age.
I agree with you 100% because you have those smaller and smaller families. The emphasis is continually on that one individual, that child. And I mean, I can even see it in the difference between our first children and towards our last, our first 1 or 2. They got so much of mom's time, just like our eldest. he was just like, if he tripped and fell, mom was there coddling him. With their younger kids, it's like they trip and fall. It's like, okay, well, if it's bleeding, come and talk to me. Otherwise, deal with it. And I think it does something to the character of the individual as they're growing up. There is that self-reliance which is kind of stripped from them, and that desire to be coddled, that desire to have everything handed to you on a silver platter. And we see that you can see it in the microcosm of a family, but you can really see it when you see, the microcosm or the macrocosm of a nation or a state or even a city where individuals, we say we want to help pick these people up. We want to help them out, give them another government program to help them get out of where they were. And at the end of the day, are we doing any good? Yeah, sure, we may put food on their table, but food on their table is not the end goal. It shouldn't be. But I think that's where it ends for a lot of these programs, is we want to make sure these people have food to eat. Well, if they have food to eat and they don't do anything with that food and energy and whatever that they're given from that program to better their situation so they can get off of the program, then one, they're not self-reliant, and two, they're not going to help future individuals who need to access that program, because they're going to still be on the program as long as they can get it. There's no incentive to move beyond. And so they get coddled like that single or one of two children, that mom is always there for them. And as long as mom's always there, they feel like, that's a safety net for me. Now, and again, not everyone, but I'd say the vast majority could fall into that very easily. It takes, there literally is very little, if almost no barrier to entry for many of these government programs, other than signing your name to a form saying you don't have money, right? And once you're on it, it's hard to get off. And so you really have to physically make a decision that I'm done with this program. I want to be off of it. I want to move on, and without that, that is self-reliance. An individual who may need to benefit or use one of these programs because they're in a hard spot, but they move beyond it. They don't let it define them. They don't let it control their future. And, it's becoming more and more difficult to find individuals who really understand what self-reliance is and utilize it.
Well, how old's your daughter today? We were video chatting, and she came in and asked if she could have breakfast. How old is she?
That one, she's 7. Yeah.
She is?
Yeah.
She's a tiny little thing. I love that she asked if she could eat breakfast, and you're like, sure. And she runs off. It's like, I'm not feeding you. Take care.
Well, see, that's its own situation, because she just knows she needs to ask now, because there have been incidences in the kitchen. So where she was alone.
She's going to go take care of herself, though. But I found a great article on intellectualtakeout.org called "Childhood Chores Are a Predictor of Success. The sooner the kids start, the better." I remember growing up, when I hit like 12 or 13, I had to wash my own clothes. It's just, my mom expected me to do it. So when I left the home for a couple years on a mission for the church, I didn't have any issues taking care of myself. And I remember hating the household chores and that growing up. Then I got out on my mission and I realized I'm pretty clean. I'm a pretty clean guy, and I take care of my stuff and my clothes, and I fold things up and hang them up. I just thought that's just normal. But I got out there and I served with different, other missionaries, and some of them, it was just atrocious. So it was surprising how little chores around the house and taking care of myself really made a difference. Plus, I grew up on a farm, and often had to go work the farm before school. In fact, I remember for a time I had to work at the local grocery store, and I'd have to be there at 2 to 3 a.m., get the freight would come in, unload it, go to school, come home, and then work on the farm. And if I had sports or something, I had to fit that in as well. So I kind of hated all that growing up, but I got used to it. And I think that's something that's helped me in my adult life, is just, there's work to do. You just do it. You don't, I think, Randall, one of the things that we have a hard time with now, kids, is they come out of high school and college and they work these service jobs, where we have to be automatons. And that's part of this huge economy that we have nowadays. We don't have the obligatory where you're an apprentice type of thing like they used to, and then you own the business eventually. So there's a lot of meaning in it. Now it's like we just work for these huge corporations and we don't have any stake. Every time I go to a business with like waiters or waitresses or a store, I'm always struck by the customer service sucking because the people that work there have no stake in it. So there's no sense of ownership and there's no self-interest in providing it unless you're just a good person. And some people really are. But growing up on the farm, it's like, yeah, I hated the work too, but it's like I could see the outcome was we made money and, it was a good feeling. And I knew I wouldn't be doing it forever.
Yeah, but then you had a stake in it because you were helping to provide for your family, and you realized it because of what it brought in.
I was helping not get my butt kicked by my dad, who, when you got a farm and you got sons or daughters, you gotta have help. The weird thing though is years later, when I actually ran that farming operation for a while, I was having my own kids work there, and the weird thing is they hated it. But even till this year, my daughter, and this was, I don't know how many years ago, but even my daughter and my son have mentioned proudly that, hey, I've worked on a farm. It's like we were watching a movie or something. And it made them really proud. They were really, really proud that they had worked on a farm and knew what that was about.
There seems to be this movement down this line where people, at least in our local area, homeschool groups and whatnot, continually talk about to the kids about how they can do hard things.
Yeah.
And previous generations, we didn't have to try and build them up and remind them that they can do hard things because they just had to.
Yeah.
And so today it's important for us. I think we fail as parents when we don't require many of these hard things of the kids, when we don't set down rules and guidelines for which the kids can then, they know the boundaries and they can try and exist within them. When we don't give them those boundaries, when we don't give them a hard time necessarily, then they don't have that growth like we've been talking about. And although I love the fact that I've heard all these different groups and individuals talk about how these kids can do hard things, it saddens me that we need to remind them. That it's like this great thing that we get to tell them that they can do great or they can do hard things, because people before, they just did hard things and that was just par for the course and they didn't need to be told because they knew they were fine. And so again, like you were talking about, those solutions, telling your kids that they can do hard things, that's external stimuli, like you were saying with Thoreau, where necessarily that's not necessarily what we need. What we need is internally to just know it, to know we're good, we understand it, we're going to do great. We don't need that same level of continuous reinforcement from outside ourselves in order to not be sad.
Yeah. Well, you actually prompted a memory I had. When I used to work on the farm, I listened to a ton of books. In fact, that was one of the most intellectually self-reliant things. The fact I had my MP3 player and I had books on there. In fact, I think I got some of those books from you, like Leadership and Self-Deception and some other books, a lot by Napoleon Hill. So anyway, I remembered that I was listening to Napoleon Hill, and I was thinking Grow Rich with Peace of Mind. And he said that most men, of course he's talking about men, but most men achieve substantial success in their life if they're hard workers from age 35 to 50. And I thought, I was in my 30s at the time, and I felt like kind of a failure because I hadn't achieved that first million by the time I was 30. Like when I was a teenager, I thought that was just a foregone conclusion. But listening to that book told me, no, most men will fail a bunch of times, but 35 to 50 is about the time you start to really figure this out. The other thing I've been listening to, Gary Vaynerchuk, which is just a very successful social media investor type guy, and Grant Cardone, who's a very successful real estate guy, and they're both around 45, 55 in that range. They have been on this tirade lately about the importance of work. That's what they say. If you want it, you have to earn it. But they both said you should plan on like 10 years. If you really want to grow something successful, plan on a decade committed to that cause. I listened to another one. I think it was the Millionaire Course. I think you put that on there as well on my iPod. Randall, I give all of my credit to you for my brains.
You're welcome. I don't know that I deserve it all, but go ahead.
Well, at least half of it. The rest I want to just give the glory to God. Anyway, that's what I'm going to say when I accept my Oscar someday. No, but I remember the Millionaire Course. Sorry, the author started this very successful publishing company. He made a goal to get this giant house in Marin County. That's right by San Francisco, I believe. And he wanted to have the giant house on the White Hill, the 10,000 square foot home. He ended up getting it. But what he said he did was he made a 10-year plan to get there. And yet he got there in 5 years. But his mindset, and along with Gary Vaynerchuk and Grant Cardone, is that plan on at least 10 years devoted to the passion, and then you'll see that success. And listening to things like that has made me calm down. I think you can get overwhelmed with the lack of speed that success travels at. But when you're focused and committed to a goal and you say, okay, I'll give it 10 years. Number one, it's really hard if you try hard. It's really hard to fail after 10 years. Might take longer, but. And number two, you're realistic. Like the whole planting a seed to grow trees, for the next generation. Takes a long time.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been listening to lately.
Yeah, even if you plant a tree, or even if you plant one, that's already been grown a certain amount, so it may be 3 or 4 years old before you get it, but you may not get anything on it for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years, so you're really looking at a minimum of like 5 to 6 years before you're going to get anything from a fruit tree. And you've got to have a lot of foresight, because you don't plant a tree and then hope to have a bumper crop of peaches, the next year. It's just not going to happen. And if that's what your business plan is, I'm going to plant a bunch of trees and I'm going to sell them next year. You're going to get one peach off your whole orchard, and that's going to be it. And you're going to go out of business. You've got to have some foresight. And again, self-reliance, relying on, okay, well, it's nobody else's fault that I thought I was going to be able to get peaches 1 year after it. I didn't do my research, right? We could blame God for the weather, or we could blame, the person who loaned us the money so we could buy the trees and the plot of land, or we could blame, whoever. If you really want to blame someone, you'll find someone to blame. But that doesn't mean it's their fault. If you can get past the blame game and just say, you know what, this was my decision, and it doesn't matter what anybody else did, the buck stops here, sort of a thing. That at that moment when you can say that, it empowers you to be able to make more better choices, and stop being the victim. You become the agent in your situation at that point in time. You become the hero of your own story. How many people think that their story would make a great novel or movie, where you wake up and if you get the person who's always whining about how they're the victim, and Starbucks didn't have my flavor of Frappuccino today, and the guy he didn't put a smiley face on my cup, and so I'm just blah 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 blah. You can find a bazillion things every day to complain about, but it's having the self-reliance to be able to say, okay, so what? What am I going to make of this day? So what? He didn't put a smiley face on my Frappuccino that was the wrong flavor. Oh, well, it tastes great. I'll enjoy what I've got and I'll move on.
Absolutely. Well, there's this article I found Oh, it's so funny. It's called Stop Pushing Kids into Safe Spaces. And then it says underneath, for human potential, few things are more dangerous than a safe space. Safe space in quotes. and this is a great story. Can I share it real quick? I just want to read this. So the author said he recently attended a college graduation, and the commencement address was delivered by a student elected to the honor by his classmate. And he says it was dripping with safe space ethos. Anyway, he says, "Where do you come from?" He asked the audience. To illustrate his own answer, he told the story from his childhood. He recalled falling asleep in the family car and waking to find himself cradled in his father's arms. "My baby tired?" his father cooed while carrying him into the house. After being gently deposited into his bed, he opened his eyes to see his mother's doting gaze. This is a great story so far. The student's punchline was to reveal that he was 14 years old at the time. An artful speech opening, to be sure, but a troubling one at the same time. So the explicit theme of his speech was being carried, and he went on to talk about his father and professors, how they lovingly carried, and his friends, how they lovingly carried each other through their lives. One other thing is he's told a story about how one of his professors had invited a bunch of the students to his house for dinner. He didn't go, the speaker, because he felt ashamed of his poor academic performance. So his professor had some of the dinner, a home-cooked meal, wrapped up and delivered to his house to make him feel better, or to his apartment to make him feel better. Anyway, said the speech didn't really give anything to do with about individual excellence or, achievement. It just was about how we need to carry each other. And so the point of the author is that we need to stop carrying each other. There's too much of a failure to launch of college graduate mentality. So isn't that a weird thing nowadays, is this failure to launch? But I don't know. I sometimes wonder about this, Randall. Is it just that we are social and we hear and see a lot more from people's personal lives? Or has this always been the case? I know those people that stand out in society really succeed has probably always been lower. Well, I mean, as far as generally.
I think that it's probably come more to the focus because of the nature of our society and this, just how we share everything online now, to the angst of everyone who has to read our posts. But I think as well, there's probably more just from what we were talking about. The individuals never being challenged in youth. And so then they get older and they're supposed to be adults, but they fail to launch because they're like, well, I'm not an adult. I'm still just a little kid. I mean, do you really feel like you're a parent, a dad of 3? Do you feel like you're that, or do you feel like you're still like an 18-year-old that's just having some crazy weird nightmares?
Yeah.
I don't think there's anyone out there that really feels like they're their age. They always feel like they're this youthful kid, and all of a sudden, their body's 40, 50, 60 years old. They don't feel like what they think they would be at that age. And so it's like, I think they get caught up in that, and they just think, well, I'm still just a teenager. I don't understand how to deal with that responsibility. And then society helps to, reaffirm the fact that, oh, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, how many people do you know when you were going to school or still going to school, that had not decided what they wanted to do? They were just in school. Right? I can't even tell you how many I talked to, and they were just like, well, I'm here. I don't know. I don't even know what my major is, or I've changed my major 7 times, and so it's made me take an extra 16 years to be in school. Yeah, whatever. It's just like, that was so prevalent. People could not make up their mind about what they wanted to be or who they were, so I think it's endemic. It's all over the place, and it makes it difficult for us to deal with it in a society when that's what makes up the society. And so if you don't have people who understand what self-reliance is, then how do you deal with it? How do you break through that? How do you how do you make society better, without understanding that. And
right. Well, my wife said something to me years ago that's haunted me ever since, because I like to order kids around. You will do this, or I'll do this, the threatening approach, which ultimately gets you what you want, but it doesn't help your kids. So that's something I wrestle with personally. Sorry to do a admission here on the air, but I try hard. And granted, kids often push your buttons. They try to, but she said to me, I guess I'll get to the point. She said to me that I'm not raising good kids. I'm raising adults. And that's, in fact, in this article I found, stop pushing kids. Oh my gosh. Stop pushing kids into safe spaces. It says the proper aim of parental nurturing is to prepare a child for independent survival as an adult. An infant begins in a condition of total dependency, but by the time they leave, he should be self-supporting, not merely financially, but intellectually and psychologically. And so I brought up the safe spaces in the college campuses, but there was that story about the comedian Kathy Griffin, who held up a severed head of Donald Trump, or it looked like it, dripping in blood. And I just thought, that's somebody that's swept up in the popular movement, right? That's someone who turned off their brain to such an extent, was so influenced by what all of her stars around her and society are doing, just like on the college campuses, that she wasn't self-reliant enough to think for herself. It was just like, oh, this will stoke the flames, and oh, this will make me look cool to my friends. It's like, no, you didn't think through the consequences. She lost her job and sponsorships, and apparently she was a Squatty Potty, which surprised me. That's a Utah-based company. They did some marketing with her, and they canceled her as a result. But anyway, that's what I think happens on the college campuses, is that kids get angry at other ideas that challenge them because they don't have the self-reliance to see that a different idea is not a threat. Right. Well, it's just a different idea.
And that's specific. I mean, that right there is so important to understand. I mean, how many of the people that are out there clamoring one way or the other, right or left camp or whatever, are doing it specifically for that reason, because they aren't self-reliant. So when they hear someone say something, they take a personal affront to it, like it's a personal attack. Like if I say something negative about Donald Trump, that means that any Trump supporter should be appalled at it, versus a society that says, oh, well, you don't like what Trump's doing? Well, let's talk about that. Let's figure out what's going on. And not being so, the world's about to end because you said something negative about Trump. It's like, okay, well, you have a differing opinion. And that's what makes this country so amazing, is that at least at one point, we respected each other's ideas or their opportunity to share their ideas and have them heard, whether we agreed with them or not. But we've become so polarized, really, and lack self-reliance. I mean, we don't want to be accountable for our choices politically. We want to say, well, I heard it on Fox News or I heard it on CNN. And so as a result, that's, since they said it, well, that must be the case. And so, we put off our own intellectual reasoning and try and put it onto these talking heads and say that they're the ones that are responsible to make the decisions for me. They're the ones that are responsible to tell me what I should think, how I should think, who I should like. And as a result, we become weaker as a people. We can't defend the principles that we say we believe in because, oh, you asked me a question about those principles? Well, let me see if CNN's talking about them right now because I need a sound bite. It weakens us. And I'm not saying we shouldn't listen to whatever media. If you want to, that's fine. But just be accountable for what you decide. Don't listen to what they say and just assume that it's good. You need to listen to what is said and then say, okay, well, that differs from how I've believed in the past. Why? Think about it. Contemplate. And say, okay, well, that's because they revealed a new truth I wasn't familiar with. That's fine. You're now being accountable for the fact that you've changed your mind about something versus saying, I don't know why it's different, but I'll just accept what he has to say. There's a total difference there. And when we realize it and we take that accountability.
You're making me think of funny things. Sorry. I'm not laughing at you. When you take accountability.
Laugh with me. What are the funny things?
Well, you're talking about, well, what you said reminded me of Emerson's quote that says, nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. And I'm just picturing UC Berkeley campus and the Trump Make America Great hats, and then Antifa with their throwing bombs, and then all the liberal students screaming. And I just thought, everyone went quiet for a second. You stepped in the middle and you said, nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. They'd all be like,
what are you talking about?
And then they just start hitting each other again. It'd be like a battle in a movie. You're up there giving the answer, and nobody understands what you're saying, like it's a different language. And this is what you're talking about. It's the principles that are the self-reliant factor. It takes effort.
A lot of effort.
I don't know why what you say triggers these images, Randall, but it does.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Thomas. But
peace through principles. What?
No, but I mean, it's so fundamental. It's so important that we understand that. So that, I mean, it's required really for our society to function and continue, and yet we further devolve as we allow other individuals to be our voice, right? And thank heavens that we have people that are willing to stand up and talk about one way of thinking or another. That's great. But that doesn't mean that their thoughts and their ideas are any better than yours, and they shouldn't be to you. What O'Reilly says or said, now that he's not on the air anymore, what he said was not necessarily the truth. It may have been what he just needed to spout today because that's what the news had. Those were the headlines, and that's what his advertisers would allow him to talk about. That doesn't mean that he's spouting principle. And here I've called out O'Reilly, but obviously, like we've said, this is endemic. It's not just one channel. It's not just one talking head. It's not anything like that. It is completely pervasive in society today, and we give up that self-reliance of thought, that self-reliance of ideas, that self-reliance of understanding, and we try and push that responsibility onto these, figureheads, so to speak. Go for it.
Right. Well, there's this great quote by Nathaniel Branden in the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and he says, quote, the goal of the maturational process is evolution toward autonomy. It's an old and excellent adage that effective parenting consists of first giving a child roots to grow and then wings to fly, the security of a firm base and the self-confidence one day to leave it, end quote. I like that. The central goal of the maturational process is evolution towards autonomy or self-reliance. But then, Randall, with what you were saying, it made me think that this is why we have such a hard time communicating as adults, especially in a political realm where it's so emotional. Number one, it's so emotional because we base so much of our external life as being the determiner of our internal life, or whatever these politicians do. That determines what I have happen. Now, the second thing is that when you have a society saturated by non-challenging professors who have a leftist ideology, Marxist ideology, and they're all about fomenting discord and anger. And then you have a conservative side where they blame the left for everything. And you bring those people into the middle where they have no intellectual self-reliance. No wonder there's sparks. No wonder they fight, because neither of them have had intellectual, philosophical, and intellectual self-reliance. Meaning none of their parents have said, I don't know, go find out the answer, or I know the answer, but here's where you can go discover it. Nobody, I love when my daughter challenges me. She's 13 and she is such an arguer, but she always questions what I say, and that can get me angry, or it's like, no, this girl's trying to figure out things for herself. So that's a good thing. If your child argues with you, well, if they argue just because they like to argue, that's one thing. But if they're arguing because they just don't understand, that's a great thing.
Yeah.
You just get on your nerves sometimes.
It does. Well, but what an opportunity for a parent to see, some growing thoughts in a child's mind, and then being able to say, okay, well, let's talk about this. Where's the core principle, and really helping them to grow through the process. I mean, because it's easy to say as a parent, well, I don't believe in that, or your teachers are screwed up. Why are they telling you that? Or even to say, that article's wrong, versus saying, okay, well, why is it wrong? Okay, so you learned that. Well, let me share some of the things that I've learned, and let's see if we can understand this better together.
Yeah.
Because then it's not you're not feeding them. You're not taking a big scoop of ideas and just handing it to them. You're trying to discover it together and helping them to grow, and to explore that with you, so that they can experience the process of, breaking out of what we were just talking about, from hearing, whatever information is being shared from whatever source, and being able to take it and say, oh, well, how does that compare with what I really believe? Is that compatible with my beliefs? Oh, it is? Okay, well, how? And really getting to the root of it. It's not necessarily a lost art, but I think it happens less and less. We're so busy as parents, we have a bazillion things to do, and the world keeps coming up with new ways to help give us more things to do, that we don't, I think a lot of us don't take the time to focus there and help our kids grow in that manner, so that they can get, that next step for intellectual self-reliance, so they can become better, and they can help stand up and lead their friends, so that their friends can do the same thing. I mean, how do we have a revolution of ideas so that these youth can become self-reliant and really understand core principles? How do we have that if we try and abdicate that to some other group or individual?
Well, let me share this experience with you, Randall. When I was 18, I graduated from high school. The day after, I was out of the house. I had to leave, A lot of it's just that my parents were church-going folks, still are, and they forced us to go to church growing up and do all the church activities, and I honestly hated it. I did not enjoy church. I liked seeing my friends, but as far as church went, besides the occasional youth activity where it was fun, I really didn't enjoy church. I had no relationship with God, and scriptures didn't matter. So when I moved away, there's two parts of this. I've always struggled with depression. That's always been a blessing and a curse. So as I got out on my own, that doesn't go away, but you're alone. So the blessing that offered is, as I struggled with it alone, no longer with my mom to pat me on the back and hug me, but I just had pride and I wouldn't let my parents know. I had to start dealing with it, going out in the outdoors, being myself, praying a lot, meditating. And I started to develop a relationship with God at that point, to really hear him and feel him. And that was because I was put in a situation of being forced to be self-reliant or move back home. And I wasn't going to move back home. In fact, before my church mission, I moved home and lived with my grandma for 3 or 4 months because I did not want to live at home. In fact, I got a job at the college, and I earned my own money, and I lived with my grandma, and that was awesome as I prepared to leave for my mission. But that was the point. I had to get in a situation where life forced me to look at topics like God and church and spiritual self-reliance. I didn't need that at home because I could live on borrowed light, and my mom and dad could force me to go to church. So it meant nothing. But when I had to struggle, it was time to get real because I didn't know anything about God. And so I started to talk to him, and it took a while, it took a few months, but I developed my own relationship that's still there to this day. So that's the experience I had with spiritual self-reliance, was that I had to be in a position of need. And so often at home, kids don't need.
No.
They don't need to feed themselves. They don't need to do anything.
It's just handed to them.
Yeah. And part of it's just out of necessity, you know. It's not because you're a bad parent.
There's a place for that, you know, where individuals are able to, I mean, obviously, when an infant is born, you can't just say, okay, you've been living on the dole too long. You've been 9 months in that, you know, nice warm womb. It's time to get to work.
Just set the baby in the backyard and hope they figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously there's a level of
cat food.
They like that. I know I did. I love the dog food. Anyway, maybe that explains a lot. No, anyway, but so. It's just one of those things that they were just necessary, you know.
Yeah.
So, but if we continue to do that beyond the point where it's necessary, and it can be hard sometimes as parents, especially like we were saying, if you don't have too many kids, having more kids forces the issue because you don't physically have the time to be able to devote to every newer kids. I mean, like I look at photo albums, we had so many pictures of our first two kids. So many pictures. The last couple, it's like, did someone take a picture of our child? Because we didn't, you know.
What did I look like as a baby, Dad? I don't know. We didn't take your picture. Well, social media has thankfully kind of replaced that, but so there's a lot there. Well, I love this topic, and I am grateful for having grown up on a farm because I did a lot of manual labor. I have shoveled more manure in my lifetime than you'll ever see. I mean, I have shoveled literally hundreds of pounds of this stuff by shovel, and you know, you appreciate that when you get away from it, of course. But as an adult looking back, I'm like, I could have had a lot worse childhood. Oh, I'll share this story, Randall. This is going to make you laugh. Not far from here, there's this local rancher, a friend of my wife and I. He has this farm, and there's only a few dozen head of cattle, right? But it's right in the middle of the city. And I don't know how it came to be, but somebody said they wanted to take their kids to a farm because they're afraid their kids wouldn't know how to work and this. So I called this friend of mine because I know he has the ranch and we've been on there a few times. And I say, hey, I got this friend who wants to bring his kids to your farm. Would that be okay? You know what this friend of mine said? No, not really. He says, you know how many calls I get every week from dads wanting to bring their kids to the farm to work? He's like, I don't have time for that. And I thought, wow. Like parents are like seriously concerned, at least, you know, according to this farmer, they want their kids to learn how to work, and there's only mowing lawn and doing chores around the house. Those are great activities, but dads especially are concerned that their kids just don't know how to work, and there's not a lot of opportunity for that anymore. Right. So I just thought that was funny. 3 calls a week, he says, at least he gets asked by parents to bring their kids to the farm.
No, I thought that for our eldest, you know, I was like, I need to get him a job hauling sprinkler pipe and bucking hay, you know. I think it would have done him good, but I was having the same trial. Anyway, thank you for joining us.
Let's end tonight. I want to say to our listeners, be self-reliant and go subscribe on YouTube at Pyrolitical Live.
That's right. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you and hope to see you and hear you next week, 7 p.m. on Wednesday night. Take care.